Welcome to Chapter 3, The Religion of Secularization in the History of Religions. This is one of the most debated and controversial topics in the entire sociology of religion. The title itself is provocative. Notice the quotation marks around religion. The authors are suggesting secularization theory has taken on almost religious characteristics itself. It's becoming a belief system that sociologists have adhered to despite contradictory evidence. This chapter examines one of the biggest questions in sociology of religion. Is religion declining in modern societies? Are we becoming more secular? This isn't just an academic debate. It shapes how we understand contemporary society, predict future trends, and think about religion's role in public life. Your textbook explains that the term secularization came from Latin, originally used by Ernst Troeltsch in the early 20th century, but it didn't become central to the U.S. sociologist until the late 1950s. In 1967, Larry Scheiner published a crucial article showing that the term had taken on multiple meanings, creating massive confusion. As we work through this chapter, keeping an open mind. The secularization thesis seemed obvious to many sociologists for decades, but the evidence is far more complex than it first appears. This slide outlines what we'll cover in Chapter 3. Let me break down the structure. First, we'll review the secularization problematic. What exactly is secularization? How has it been defined? Your textbook shows there are multiple, sometimes contradictory definitions. Second, we'll examine the background conditions that led to its use. Why did sociologists become convinced that religion was declining? What historical and social changes sparked this theory? Third, we'll explore debates that emerged around secularization. Not all sociologists agree. There were fierce arguments about whether secularization was really happening. Fourth, we'll consider challenges to secularization theory. By the 1990s, many sociologists concluded the theory was fundamentally flawed. Why? The major takeaway, and this is crucial, is that religion is essentially variable in nature. Religion changes constantly. As long as people practice religion, change is expected and normal. There is a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, is religion declining, we should ask, how is religion changing? Instead of comparing past religion to present religion and seeing only loss, we should recognize religion has always been changing, adapting, and taking new forms. The word change is on your slide. That is key. That's the lens through which your textbook wants you to view this entire chapter. This discussion question gets to the heart of the chapter. The only religion that does not change, in fact, is a dead religion. Think about what this means. If a religion never changed, if it practiced exactly the same rituals, held exactly the same beliefs, used exactly the same language, addressed exactly the same social concerns as it did centuries ago, what would that tell us? It would suggest that religion is disconnected from the lived human experience. Real, living religions respond to changing social conditions. They adapt to new technologies, new forms of social organization, new moral challenges, new knowledge about the world. So let's consider some changes and some examples. Christianity has changed enormously over 2,000 years, from a persecuted Jewish sect to the Roman Empire's official religion, through the Reformation, into countless denominations with wildly different practices and beliefs. American Judaism transformed from largely Orthodox immigrant communities in 1900 to a predominantly Reform and conservative Judaism by mid-century, with ongoing debates about women rabbis, LGBTQ+ inclusion, intermarriage, and Jewish identity. Islam is practiced differently in Indonesia than Saudi Arabia, differently in urban mosques than rural villages, differently by young Muslims than their grandparents. This question challenges us. When we observe religious change, we are witnessing religious decline. Or are we simply witnessing religion being alive and responsive to its social context? This question will frame everything that follows in this chapter. Now let's define secularization, which turns out to be much harder than you might think. So your slide presents two very different approaches. The negative view is that some condemn the secular as a lifestyle that is at odds with God. This is a theological judgment, not a sociological definition. From this perspective, secular means ungodly, immoral, materialistic. Many religious people use secular this way. In sociology, our views are more objective, where sociologists describe secularization as the process of rationalization of action. This is Weber's approach, or a process whereby explanation, referring to forces outside this world, were constantly being laid aside. Supernatural explanation giving way to natural explanations. Your slide notes this involves evidence of epistemologies shifting. Epistemology means theory of knowledge, how we know what we know. Secularization, from this perspective, means a shift in how people explain the world. So we're moving from God controls the weather to meteorological systems control the weather, from disease is punishment for sin to disease is caused by pathogens, from the king rules by divine right to governments derive authority from consent of the governed. But here's the complexity your textbook emphasizes. Even as these epistemological shifts occurred, did religion necessarily decline, or did it change form? And this is the central debate we will explore. Max Weber is the foundational theorist of secularization, so we need to understand his specific concepts. Weber observed a process he called rationalization or disenchantment. So let me unpack these terms. Rationalization means that modern life becomes organized around systematic calculation, efficiency, and means in reasoning rather than tradition, emotion, or religious values. Bureaucracy, scientific management, legal rational authority, all of these represent rationalization. Disenchantment means literally de-magicification. So it's the removal of magic from the world. In pre-modern worldviews, the world was enchanted, filled with spirits, demons, angels, magical forces. Through rationalization, Weber argued mystery and magic are stripped away. Your textbook notes that Weber uses intellectualization as a synonym. This doesn't mean people are smarter now. It means we approach the world through intellectual analysis rather than accepting traditional or religious authority. Your textbook emphasizes there's no single secularization theory. There are multiple theories using the term in different ways. Well, this creates enormous confusion. Mark Chavez defines secularization as the declining scope of religious authority. Religion doesn't disappear, but its authority becomes limited to narrow domains. The church can't tell scientists what's true or governments what laws to pass. Larry Shiner identified 5 different meanings of secularization that scholars use. First, decline of religion. Religious beliefs and practices are decreasing. Number 2, conformity with this world. Religion is becoming less otherworldly. Disengagement of society from religion. That's the separation of church and state. Number 4, Transposition of religious beliefs and institutions. This is secular institutions taking over functions previously performed by religion. And number 5, the desacralization of the world. The world understood naturally rather than supernaturally. So these are different claims. You could have declining religious authority, Chavez, without declining religious belief. You could have separation of church and state without people becoming less religious personally. Oliver Shannon created a diagram mapping different secularization theories and showing their relationships. This diagram reveals the complexity different theorists emphasize different aspects. The key concepts are separation of church and state as political secularization. Institutional differentiation means religious, political, economic, and educational institution becoming separate rather than unified. And the takeaway is when someone says secularization, you need to ask, what exactly do you mean by that? This slide highlights two crucial points that the textbook emphasizes. First, the secular or secularization is always thought of in relation to religion or the religious. So think about this carefully. You cannot define secular without reference to religious. The terms are relational. They define each other. This creates a problem. If our understanding of what counts as religious changes, then our understanding of what counts as secular also changes. For example, is meditation secular or religious? Well, it depends. If someone meditates for stress relief with no spiritual benefits, we might call it secular. But if someone meditates as Buddhist practice, we call it religious. The same activity gets classified differently based on context and meaning. Second, the truth of secularization is dependent on historical evidence. So this is crucial. Secularization is an empirical claim about historical change. It can't be proven through logic alone. We need evidence comparing religious life at different time periods. So your slide shows time 1 religious, time 2 less religious. This is the basic logic. We must compare the past to the present. If religion has declined, secularization is occurring. If religion hasn't declined or has increased, secularization theory is wrong. But here's the problem the textbook explores. How do we know what religion was like in the past? How do we measure it? What sources do we use? And how do we know if change represents decline versus just change? So this seemingly simple comparison turns out to be enormously complex. So this is a deceptively simple question. What causes secularization? Well, different theorists have proposed different causal mechanisms. Your textbook discusses several. Modernization. Some argue that economic development, urbanization, industrialization, and technological advancement inevitably undermine religion. As societies modernize, they supposedly become more secular. Rationalization. Weber's argument, as rational legal authority and scientific thinking spread, traditional and charismatic authority, including religious authority, declines. Differentiation. As specialized institutions emerge, separate economic, political, education, medical system, religion loses its monopoly on various social functions. Pluralism. Some theorists argue that religious diversity undermines certainty. When you're surrounded by people with different religious beliefs, your own beliefs may seem less absolute. Material prosperity. Some suggest that when people are comfortable and secure, they do not need religion. They need it less. Though this doesn't really explain why wealthy Americans are more religious than wealthy Europeans. Education. Some argue that higher education leads to religious decline. Evidence is mixed. Many highly educated people are, in fact, religious. The textbook wants you to think critically. Are these really causes of secularization, or are they just changes that happen to occur at the same time as some religious changes? Correlation does not prove causation. Moreover, these supposed causes don't actually produce secularization consistently across different societies, and this raises serious doubts about the theory. So, what is the evidence for secularization? Your textbook reviews various types of evidence that supporters of secularization theory have cited. There's a church membership decline. In some European countries, church membership has indeed declined dramatically since the mid 20th century. In East Germany, Great Britain, and Slovenia, only about 10 to 17% claim church membership today, down from much higher levels in the 1950s. Attendance decline. Church attendance in Western Europe is very low compared to mid-century, 20th mid-century levels. Belief changes. Surveys show declining belief in traditional Christian doctrines in some population. Institutional changes, separation of church and state, the removal of religion from public schools, declining influence of religion, institutions, and politics. But your textbook is about to complicate this picture. The evidence is not as clear-cut as secularization theorists assume. There's the American exception. The U.S. remains highly religious despite being highly modern, so this contradicts modernization theory. Measurement problems. Historical data on religious practice is often unreliable. Were people really more religious in the past, or do we have romanticized views? Religious change versus decline. Some changes that look like decline might actually be transformation. People leaving traditional churches might be joining new religious movements or practicing spirituality in new ways. Selective evidence. Secularization theorists often focus on evidence that confirms their theory while ignoring contemporary evidence. So the next slides will explore these complications in detail. Your textbook presents a crucial case study, the Middletown Studies. In the 1920s, sociologist Robert and Helen Lynn studied Middletown, which was actually Muncie, Indiana, as a typical American community. They documented religious life extensively. In the 1970s, researchers returned to Middletown to see what had changed. According to secularization theory, religion should have declined significantly over 15 years of modernization. What they found came as a surprise to the proponents of secularization theory. The textbook notes that the lens had projected the religion would decline, but it hadn't. Among 15 trends from the original study, 3 showed increasing religiosity, 10 showed no trend, and only 2 showed decreasing. Between 1924 and 1978, Muncie didn't become more secular. If anything, it became more religious in some ways. This study, along with others, raises serious questions. If 50 years of modernization didn't secularize Middletown, what does that say about secularization theory? Moreover, Americans in the 1970s showed greater religiosity than in the 1920s in many measures. How could this be if secularization was an inevitable process? Your textbook presents data showing that religious belief and practice in America remained remarkably stable or even increased during much of the 20th century. So this doesn't fit the secularization narrative at all. Now we're in the critique. Your textbook discusses Jeffrey Haddon's devastating 4-part critique of secularization theory. So let me walk through Haddon's argument. Hayden essentially argued that secularization theory was more ideology than science. He had 4 critiques. Secularization theory is internally weak in logical structure. So it's a hodgepodge of loosely employed ideas, not a coherent theory. Different theories use the term differently, that are making claims that are unsupported or circular. The secularization idea does not exist in isolation. It came from Enlightenment ideology and Protestant biases, so not from objective empirical research. It's a doctrine more than a scientific theory. New religious movements have appeared and persisted. So if religion were truly declining, why did new religions keep emerging? Stark and Bainbridge show that where traditional religion is the weakest, new religions are most likely to emerge. Religion has also emerged as a vital force in the political order. So far from disappearing from public life, religion has become increasingly important in politics globally. Think of the religious right in America, Islamic political movements, and liberation theology. Your textbook quotes Haddon, concluding with forecast about religion's future place in society. He argued religion would return to prominence, which contradicted secularization theory's predictions. Haddon's critique was published in 1987, and it helped to shift the entire field of sociology and religion. So now let's look at an alternative to secularization theory. That's civil religion. Your slide shows civil religion in America. The concept was introduced by Robert Bellah in his famous 1967 article, Civil Religion in America. Bellah argued that the U.S. has a religious dimension that exists alongside denominational religion. So it isn't Christianity or a specific tradition. It's a distinct American civil religion. So there are characteristics of civil religion. It includes beliefs that America has a special destiny, that American principles are divinely inspired, that the nation stands under God's judgment. It also includes symbols, the American flag, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and national monuments. It includes rituals, so presidential inaugurations, 4th of July celebrations, Memorial Day observances, saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Presidential inaugural addresses regularly invoke God, regularly reference biblical themes, and present America in religious terms. Civil religion provides a transcendent standard by which the nation should be judged, a framework for national unity across religious differences, and meaning and legitimation for the nation's existence. This is crucial for the secularization debate. If America has civil religion, then maybe society isn't becoming less religious. Religion is just taking different forms. So where can we identify civil religion in values, beliefs, songs, rituals, documents? Well, in values, we think about liberty, equality, democracy, individualism. So are these political values, or do they have sacred status in American culture? Do we treat them as negotiable preferences or sacred principles? America is a city on a hill. That's Ronald Reagan, echoing John Winthrop. American exceptionalism, a belief that America has a special role in history. So are these religious beliefs about America? What about our songs? God Bless America, America the Beautiful, the national anthem. Many invoke divine blessing or present America in sacred terms. Rituals. And we think about the presidential inauguration. The president places his hand on a Bible. So help me God, concludes the oath. Prayers are offered. This isn't required by the Constitution. This is a civil religious ritual. We also have rituals such as standing for the national anthem, our hand over our heart for the Pledge of Allegiance, Memorial Day observances at cemeteries, Thanksgiving as a national holiday with religious themes. The Declaration of Independence invokes nature's God and creator. It doesn't specifically say God or a God. In God we trust on currency, and under God, added in 1954 in the pledge. These aren't just secular political expressions. They're expressions of a religious relationship that Americans have with their nation. So we have studies of civil religion to show that isn't just theoretical. We've actually measured it. In statements about civil religion, um, Wimberly et al. Developed questions to measure civil religious beliefs, and they tested them on populations. What they found is that civil religion is distinct from denominational religion. You can measure it separately. There are some examples that tap civil religion. America's founding documents represent divine wisdom. Holidays like the 4th of July are sacred times, and God has a special plan and place for America. In the locus of civil religion, this is who holds these beliefs most strongly. People affiliated with major Protestant denominations and Catholics show higher levels of civil religiosity. Political and religious liberals tend to score lower on civil religion measures. There's variation across demographic groups and education levels. The key finding is civil religion isn't uniformly distributed. Some Americans are deeply committed to civil religion, others reject it. Recent research has examined how civil religion relates to political attitudes and voting behaviors, attitude about war, military service, immigration, and national identity. If civil religion exists and is measurable, then maybe what looks like secularization is actually religious transformation. Religion hasn't declined, it's taken new forms that earlier theorists did not recognize as religious. So now let's talk about Thomas Luckman's concept of invisible religion. Your slide shows to be human equals to be religious. To be religious equals to be human. Invisible religion. Well, this is a major alternative to secularization theory. And the slide poses a provocative equation. Luckman argued that there is an irreducible religious dimension to human existence. Religion isn't something that can just simply disappear. It's fundamental to being human. But Luckman redefined religion in a radical way. From his perspective, religion doesn't have to involve churches or institutions, beliefs in God or supernatural beings, or traditional rituals or practices. Instead, Luckman argued that religion is fundamentally about transcendence, the capacity to transcend immediate biological existence and create systems of meaning. In fact, every human society does this. Luckman argues that in modern society, religion hasn't disappeared. It's become invisible. It's moved from public institutional forms to private individualized forms. People construct their own systems of meaning, selecting elements from various traditions. They may not attend church, but they still engage in fundamentally religious meaning making. This makes religion invisible to sociologists who only look at institutional religion. When they see declining church attendance and conclude religion is declining. But Luckman argues they're looking in the wrong place. If Luckman is right, secularization theory is completely wrong. It's based on mistaking a change in religion's form for religion's decline. So within modern invisible religion, Luckman identifies several themes. The first is individual autonomy. The self becomes sacred. Personal growth, self-actualization, being true to yourself are treated as ultimate values. There's themes of mobility and self-expression. Freedom, self-realization, personal fulfillment become religious goods. Familialism. The family unit can become a sacred center of meaning and ultimate concern. What about sexuality? Modern sexual ethics and identities take on religious intensity and meaning. Luckman's approach challenges conventional sociology of religion. If religion can be invisible, if fundamentally religious behavior doesn't look traditionally religious, how do we study it? How do we measure it? Critics have asked, if everything can be religious, doesn't that make the concept meaningless? If shopping, therapy, sports fandom, political movements, and self-help can all be religious, what does the term even mean? But defenders argue this gets at something real. Modern people do invest ultimate meaning in things that aren't traditionally religious. The form of religion has changed, but the function remains the same. For secularization theory, this is devastating. If invisible religion exists, then what looks like secularization is actually just religious transformation. The underlying religious myth of secularization theory is that in the past, people were significantly more religious than they are today. Well, this is a myth of the age of faith, and this is crucial. Secularization theory depends on a historical claim. There was once an age of faith where people were deeply, sincerely, uniformly religious. Modern times represent a decline from that golden age. But it's a myth. It's historically inaccurate. People who accept secularization theory usually point to the medieval era as the age of faith. European society was supposedly united under Christianity. Everyone believed deeply, and the church was central to life. But historians disagree with this. Historians show that medieval people were not uniformly devout. Church attendance was often low. Popular religion was often at odds with official church teaching. Many Christians were nominal Christians at best. The church had to wage campaigns to educate people, even about basic Christian beliefs. The Catholic Middle Ages and the Age of Reformation are 19th century constructs created by romantics and scholars after the fact, not actually reflecting historical reality. What happened around 1500 to 1850 wasn't decline from an age of faith. It was the Christianization of Europe. Europe became more religious, not less. If there never was an age of faith, then the entire narrative of religious decline collapses. What about pluralism and the plausibility problem? So Peter Berger's version of secularization theory shows a list of religions: Protestant, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, Sikhism, Jainism, Mormonism, Catholicism, Taoism, Hinduism, Shinto, Rastafarianism, and Wicca. The visual impact of this list is very important. Berger argued that in pre-modern societies, everyone in a community shared the same religious worldview, and this created a strong plausibility structure. Your beliefs seemed obviously true because everyone around you believed the same things. In modern pluralistic societies, you encounter people with radically different religious beliefs. Your neighbor may be Hindu, your coworker is Muslim, your friend is an atheist, your relative just joined a New Age movement. Berger argued this pluralism undermines plausibility. When you see intelligent, moral people believing very different things, your own beliefs start to seem less certain. Berger predicted this would lead to secularization. Without strong plausibility structure, religion would decline. But this prediction failed. Religious pluralism has increased dramatically in the West, but religion hasn't declined universally. America is highly pluralistic and highly religious. In the 1990s, Berger admitted his theory was wrong. Pluralism doesn't necessarily undermine religious vitality. Sometimes it increases it through religious competition. This is a crucial insight that undermines simple secularization theory. Religion is fixed, is the assumption. The reality is religion is essentially variable. It changes. Secularization theorists assumed religion had a fixed essence that could be measured consistently across time. When they saw change, they interpreted it as decline. But your text argues that religion is not static, an unchanging thing. Religion has always been changing, adapting, transforming. This is normal, healthy, and expected. So let's think about this historically. Early Christianity looked very different from medieval Christianity, which looked very different from Reformation Christianity. It looks very different from contemporary Christianity. Are all these the same religions? Well, in some sense, yes, and in some sense, no. American religion in the 1800s, which was dominated by Congregationalist Episcopalians and Presbyterians, looked very different from American religion in 1900, dominated by Methodists, Baptists, and Catholics, which looks very different from American religion in 2000, more diverse, more spiritual, but not religious, and more mega churches. So is this decline or change? So you need to recognize what secularization theorists measure as decline was often just a transformation. Religion wasn't disappearing, it was just taking new forms. The takeaway, religion changes. It always has. It always will. This is what it means for religion to be alive. So here's a list of key terms that you should know from Chapter 3. Let me highlight a few of the important ones. Let's look at disenchantment, the world losing its magical, supernatural qualities. Intellectualization, knowledge based on rational analysis rather than tradition or revelation. Civil religion, Robert Bella's concept of American sacred beliefs, symbols, and rituals about the nation itself. Invisible religion, Thomas Luckman's concept of religion taking individualized, privatized forms that institutional measures miss. Make sure you can define each of these and explain its significance for debates about secularization. So this is your minute paper assignment for Chapter 3. Write 5 to 10 sentences. Do you see signs of religious decline in American society? If so, give examples of this. If not, explain why you think that religion persists in America. So this assignment will test whether you've grasped the chapter's complexity. There's no right answer, but your answer should demonstrate understanding of the issues. If you argue for decline, you might cite rising religious nuns. Now about 25 to 30% of Americans claim no religious affiliation. Declining church attendance rates, especially among young adults, declining confidence in religious institutions, increasingly secularization of public life, and less biblical literacy. But you should also acknowledge complications. Maybe this represents change more than decline. Maybe new forms of spirituality are emerging, even as traditional religion declines. Well, if you argue religion persists, you might cite that the majority of Americans still believe in God and pray, that megachurches are thriving, that new religious movements continue to emerge, and religion remains politically influential, as well as Americans are more religious than Europeans despite similar modernity. But you should also acknowledge challenges. Maybe some measures do show decline, even if religion hasn't disappeared. So the best answers will show nuance. Religion is changing in complex ways. Some measures show decline, others show persistence, and others growth. Or it depends on what you measure and how you measure it. This concludes Chapter 3. Look for the next video on Chapter 4.